Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from LastCar.info, and welcome back to Behind the Wall, our first actual race review episode of the season. Welcome back to the 2025 NASCAR campaign, the Cup Series kicking things off in Bowman Gray Stadium for the Busch Clash out there, or the Cookout Clash, rather, in this one here. Love the cross-promotion there with the scarves that were handed out and the talented Harris Lou behind that effort there as well. Unofficially, pending the results of post-race inspection, and who knows how long that is going to go tonight, but luckily they're all pretty close to the shops here. In the meantime, Chase Elliott, your race winner in this one, with a pretty dominant performance over this short weekend there, between being very fast in practice, ultimately basically having the pole from his rank in the heat race that he also won, and then coming out in this one and really being pretty dominant from the start of this race. There were other drivers that were factors in it. Certainly Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney coming from the back of the field up there. Others really trying to challenge for the top spot there. But Chase had this one pretty well in his back pocket, kind of reminiscent of his performance at the Bristol All-Star race back in 2020 there. So certainly Chase Elliott fans, they're very happy about this outcome, understandably. I think there's a lot of positives and, some other criticisms to bring up along the way here. But I would say, starting off here, overall, very enjoyable weekend, I would say. Yes, this race, was a bit more tame in the main event itself, very reminiscent of when we went back to North Wilkesboro for the All-Star race there, and everybody expecting that one to be a big crash fest, ignoring the many years and decades of races where you'd have a guy lead 370 laps or something, and it being more of an endurance match. But the Bowman Gray Stadium deal, the Madhouse situation, we certainly saw elements of that, definitely in the heat races and even the last chance qualifier as well. Some interesting storylines built up here. I really appreciated the amount of press that Burt Myers and Tim Brown received this weekend for being so excellent at Bowman Gray Stadium, even though in this one here they were really given kind of lower tier rides in the Cup Series. Certainly the team of Merivet, the former the money team effort there, kind of reincorporating itself from last season, and then also the other Rick Ware Racing deal brought into this effort there for him. But great deal to get their entries in the field. It's unfortunate neither of them made it into the main event there, but they were definitely getting a lot of press, and especially from the TV broadcast. I feel like historically, small teams or even like part-time drivers that come in, maybe they'll get a little bit of coverage in qualifying, but then in the race itself, very little of it. I still think that Myers' charge in the last chance qualifier could have been covered quite a bit better. He was well inside the top 10 before the incident with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. occurred, and a fantastic run for a team that really, this is the same team that was hobbling back and forth in the duels a couple of years ago because they didn't have enough time to set up the car. I think it was the first team also that had a loose lug nut and had the rim carve itself in half and fly off when Kaz Gralla was running it at Daytona. This is a team that's really kind of struggled during that time. And of course, now with this rebranding with the team of Merivet deal. So that was good to see. I really appreciated that. And I think the broadcast, for as many things, there's still problems with zooming in. There's still problems with leaving the football stuff aside. I know they're covering the Super Bowl in a couple weeks, but parking that just for a couple hours here and allowing you to kind of talk, feature, for example, the driver intros, which, as were brought up by the RFK Racing account, were very much kind of a throwback to the old days of the Winston, where you had like the big gate that would open up and the trucks would roll out with the drivers waving to the crowd and smoke machines going off as the car is being pushed out. It looked like with the red lighting that it was very much the same atmosphere. Would have been great if that got featured in the broadcast. All it would have taken is just, having these guys stop talking and point the camera another way. I don't know why that wasn't possible. But not to front load this too much with negative stuff here, because I think in general, in spite of, the usual Foxisms that we usually see, or just, casual inaccuracies, bad camera work, and things of that nature, I think they still accidentally managed to make this track look really cool. Looked very inviting. Great to see the crowd there and how excited they were. And really just the difference. Covering the LA Clash a couple years ago, I only covered the inaugural run in 2022. But it was a great experience. It was a privilege to be there, and I enjoyed covering it out there. Definitely a different track, and I think we can understand why the racing was very different tonight than it was just a couple of years ago when that race was run, for sure. And I appreciated them making that comparison too. Again, of course, the novelty of competing in the LA Coliseum was great, given its extensive history, and this particular race occurring at a time where it was a historical landmark for them. I think it was their 100th anniversary or 125th, something of that nature. And having this event be part of that anniversary season was a great deal. But I know that it was definitely kind of thing where, one car would even kind of get loose and the traffic on the entire field would just lock up and nobody can do anything. In this one here tonight, we really saw, several incidents, maybe one or two car incidents, but there would be a way for drivers to kind of drive around and make their way through. Certainly having the grass infield without the jersey barriers on the inside, that's a big part of it there. As cool as it was to be able to see what was happening behind the scenes and teams lining up there in the infield at the LA Clash, having, of course, the grass field, obviously still an active football field and everything, so they're going to still have that there. But just that traditional setup, you can see why this track has been around for as long as it has and puts together such excellent racing, why it's still hard to get tickets even for their weekly shows out there. Well deserved out there. And I think that they did a fine job showing just how neat this track really was. I mean, how beautiful the building is and the outfield there with a big screen on it for everybody to watch. You got everybody sitting in the bleachers. You have like kind of little quirks to it also, like how it really is just that quarter-mile track that we all ran on back in high school. But at the same time, it also has just really good drainage, even though it had like heavy rains the day before qualifying. All that got settled really quick because it drained out way better than, for example, North Wilkesboro did just last year. I think that it just showed that the area it had that much more of that aura of a local short track than we really got in the LA Coliseum deal. There were other logistical issues, I think, that prevented that from really being the case. For example, the garage area at the Coliseum had to be the closest parking lot was not a short walk from the Coliseum itself to get there. I know that when I was covering out there, I was really trying to see if anything was happening back there, and just doing that walk, you miss a lot of action there during that, and then really kind of discovered they were using more of the infield there. And I think a lot of people were trying to kind of figure out how that worked. In this event here, I mean, it was great. You had like that exit in turn 3. You have this little dedicated area where a team could actually repair their car and get back out, and then just exit off of turn 4 and get back out there. And that was cool. And then as we saw with Chase Briscoe, who did end up unofficially being our last place finisher for the Clash here, another road that could lead you back down to where the haulers are and then have teams load up from there. So great infrastructure that they put around this, certainly understandable from something that was built during the New Deal, during the Depression, and something that was well built that stood the test of time. In fact, as I mentioned before the race here, those of you who recalled reading my book, JD, the first book I published, JD McDuffie actually attended his first ever race at what I believe was actually the first ever auto race held at the Bowman Gray Stadium in May of 1948, I believe it was. He was 10 years old at the time. It's 48 or 49, right at the very beginning of it there, but had very fond memories of the competitors in the field. He was very young at the time, so he actually had issues with the exhaust fumes at the moment, so he left the track there early, but that definitely kind of led to his interest in the sport. So it very much has that history there as well. He was one of those people sitting in those stands back then, and it's amazing to think what has been built on in the many years and decades since. And now to have, much like what we saw, I mean, it's one thing to have North Wilkesboro and now soon Rockingham coming back into the circuit, where it's not been that long ago since we had actual people that remembered what it was like racing there, not to mention televised races that you and I can all watch very easily here on YouTube. But at the same time, to have a different track like this, where even before the beginning of the modern era, really was a track that was one of the many that was eliminated when the schedule was, was reduced during the very beginning of the Winston era there. It's amazing to see that come back in where, you're going to have some older fans that maybe remember what it was like racing there. But it's a much bigger generation gap covering that particular track there too. So that was really kind of interesting to kind of have back out there. And again, we saw some glimpses of just how crazy the racing could be there. And they were glimpses. It wasn't really the norm. You would have, I think, in the 200 lap race, it was much more 1 and 2 car spins, and teams really having trouble kind of recovering from that. Certainly, Kyle Busch was a big factor in that, having run in last place for most of this race after what was a pretty ordinary spin and not really much damage there. And it's to hear in the discussion there about, again, the issues with this car, not the track. We're talking all about this history and what crazy racing it's had for other circuits, late models, modifieds, and whatever have you. Going back to even good convertible series at one point many years ago. If we're talking about like downforce being an issue at this track here, it really does show that, how crazy things are with this car. And to the point where it was even illustrated by Larry McReynolds there and showing like how much damage is sustained to the nose of the car and how it disrupts the airflow under the car and it affects the handling of the car. Obviously, a modern car is going to have a lot of new quirks to it that weren't around back then. But it does kind of change the racing, I think, the approach of it a little bit. And certainly we saw that tonight where, any driver that had like, 1 or 2 minor incidents in an event, they were pretty much eliminated from contention. Whereas in the heats and the last chance qualifier, it just seemed like there just wasn't enough time to get back up there, no matter how many cautions there were, because you just had to, anytime you were being in the high lane, you get your quarter panel hit, you get flicked back through the field. In this particular case here, it just seemed like people would get strung out and you really couldn't kind of catch up there. So we do have kind of, again, another combination of, this great bit of history, this track that, is getting its flowers and discussing it and showing like, who the hardcore fans out there and which drivers they support. But then at the same time, yes, still having much work to be figured out in these cars. Kudos to Kevin Harvick, even pointing out like how much Kyle Larson's head moved during a very ordinary accident. Didn't even have a very hard hit in 1 or 2 of these minor incidents that he had during the race, but still, just a little bit of a bump and just how much your head moves. I shudder to think what it would have looked like back in 2022 when Tyler Reddick actually had to park his car during the race because he was having such, so much concussion effects from just ordinary bumping and banging in Martinsville back then. So there is still work to be done on that end there, and hopefully that's something that gets worked out. But I think compared to the LA Clash, and again, as much as I enjoyed covering the races there, I think it could probably be fairly said that this was at least better than those. I think that as much of a tremendous, I think, feat it was to even be able to put on that race. I think that was really kind of the big draw of it. And certainly kind of the unique vistas of like, cars sitting under beautiful trees, sitting in the outside there. And I think really kind of served almost like a Winston preview where it would just kind of, you're seeing these paint schemes. And even in that case, these cars for the first time. And then it just happens to be a bonus that there's also this race where you're actually going to be racing them at the same time. They're not just show cars. In this case here, having it in the Charlotte area, having it at a track with this history, and having a track that has a little bit more room when you have an altercation, that drivers can, run through the grass or whatever. That makes it more interesting. And I do think there's a lot that was happening in these races, even in the main event here, that we didn't get to see, which is an extraordinary thing to have to say. But that's really, again, it goes right back to Fox again and how they cover these races and how they just won't pull the camera back and see what's happening through the field. In a race like this, you have to do that, especially in these qualifiers and these heats where the best battles really are right around that spot. You'd have 1 or 2 guys pull away, and then everything else is just a mess. It's just a madhouse. I mean, literally. So, it just kind of fits right into that. But, that's another part to be looking at. And, a little concerned about where things go from here and what the broadcast is going to be looking like for Daytona and so forth. Because, again, it didn't feel like a significant difference. We're still seeing the cartoon characters of the drivers, which I'm not crazy about either. They've kept changing. I think they've changed Ryan Blaney's cartoon face like 3 times, and each time it just looks awful. And, Kyle Larson's looks stupid. I mean, there's just so many problems with them. And, it's like you got the people there. I know it's not just NASCAR. It's somebody at Fox that just likes them because they do it in the NFL. You'll see them in the Super Bowl a couple weeks. You'll see them in the World Series. You'll see it anywhere else, like whatever other sports they're going to be covering here. And it's just unfortunate. I think, do we really need another barrier that separates people from the athletes that they're watching? I just want to see what the person looks like, so that if I run into them at the track, I'm gonna know what they look like. If I'm somebody that's new to the sport and doesn't know who these people are, that's something that really, that needs to be fixed. Garrett Smithley in particular had I don't know what they were even thinking with that. That didn't look a thing like him. So it kind of looked like just did Kyle Busch's face, and they changed the hair a little bit or something. I don't know what that was about. So it's unfortunate, there's a lot of work to be done. I don't know if they're going to do it. Obviously, they're going to be very excited about IndyCar coming up as well. They should be. Since our last show, they've already expanded their IndyCar commercial promos, where they now have another one with Alex Palou, and that's very exciting. And I'm sure they kind of teased Will Power in that, and maybe that'll be the chain reaction. They kind of feature another driver in it, and that leads to the next. It's perfect. It's great. It's something that any of their properties should be getting, because I think it'll put together a different deal there. So, we'll see how many more of those get generated between now and St. Petersburg. But that'll be another story coming up. But, here in NASCAR, there's a lot of new things coming up here, and maybe those things are going to change things a bit in terms of the Xfinity coverage and having, a regular booth instead of the guest commentators here. Maybe that's going to help Adam Alexander's calls. I don't know. We heard in this race here, we saw Rick Allen come back, which was surprising. Him as the play-by-play guy. I always figured he was going to land on his feet somewhere. I didn't think that, if it turned out that last year was the last time we were going to hear him in the booth for NBC, I didn't think he was just going to just be out of work. So it was good to hear on that. And he did a solid job there during the pre-race there. Again, there's again, I've always been talking about, like, trying to put people in different places, and maybe that's a better place for him there versus, the play-by-play. Again, kind of more of a host thing. I think, again, Adam Alexander probably should get looked at more closely for that. But again, maybe the Xfinity coverage we see next week or next couple weeks in Daytona and going forward from there is going to really kind of give us a better look at that. Another thing that was an aspect of this race tonight, and I just started subscribing to this year with the changes in the streaming arrangements and so forth. Good job by the folks at Max that do the onboard cameras. I was very pleased with that. I shared screenshots on the Twitter feed tonight, like I did with NASCAR Drive, since that was introduced the last couple of years. NASCAR Drive I've been pretty happy with before, because it had like a scrolling list of drivers. You could switch between them quickly, which is really handy for what I do, especially if what's happening in the back of the field kind of changes a lot there. And it is the kind of service where, if it ended up being put behind a paywall to improve the quality of it or something, I wasn't really that against it, as long as it wasn't really outrageous. They had plans available for this Max deal where it had with ads and without. I kind of went for the middle tier here, and I was pretty happy with it tonight. They didn't have it for the last chance qualifier, as far as I saw, unless anybody in here had a different experience, let me know. But, I didn't see it for that. I didn't see it for the heats that were on Saturday. But they did have it for the main event, and it was great. I really liked how you can kind of switch between the different channels. I use the second screen that I'm set up right here that I have the chat on here has a touch screen on it, and it had an interface with that where you could swipe between the channels really good, and they had kind of big icons for it. So I was able to do that pretty easily, even in a race like this where you actually did have a good number of last place changes. Kyle Busch, Chase Briscoe, and Ryan Blaney being among them there. That made it really good. So I was really happy with that. There were a couple of glitches there. For example, Carson Hocevar's camera had an issue during the race. It was actually during the halfway point that it started to fail, and then when he wrecked, it still wasn't working during that. I don't know if I could blame that on the Max thing. That may have just been something that was going on with his camera, particularly in that car. I don't know what the situation was. I didn't really look at too many of the other channels besides those, so I don't know if anybody had any issues with any of the other ones. But it seemed like it worked pretty well. And yes, as I mentioned, this has the audio. It has the scanner audio in there. I actually put it on mute because I already used the NASCAR one for the scanner audio, and it seemed to sync up with that pretty well. It's a little bit ahead still even though, and both of these are a little bit ahead of the actual TV broadcast. But I don't mind that too much because actually in this case, it allowed me to kind of prepare. Like when the officials would say there was a caution, I'd kind of keep my eye out on that screen and see when it came up. And what's great about it too is unlike NASCAR Drive, you could rewind it as well. So for example, when Chase Briscoe suddenly dropped out, which seemed like it kind of unusual, he didn't seem to have a big involvement in that incident with Kyle Larson towards the end of the race there, but he ended up pulling into the garage area. It seemed like he may just got hit in one of the wheels there, but I could actually rewind it a bit to that moment and to see him go back to the garage area, see them work on the car, and then take it over to the hauler. It was good to get that information, which is great. That's going to be tremendous. If it stays that way the rest of this year, I think it's going to be a tremendous asset, certainly for my coverage here, because most of the schedule is still going to be here at Last Car headquarters. I am going to be doing a few races trackside this year and looking to expand that in the future. But for the majority is still going to be here at home. And I'm glad that there's something there that can make that workable. So I was very happy with that on the outset. I was a little apprehensive because I couldn't really test it out before. I had to just kind of wait until the main event started. Just, okay, let's just hope and see if it works. But I was pretty happy with that. NASCAR Drive, I liked up to this point. I certainly liked having it versus just not having anything when they got rid of the track pass deal and the race view where you had the digital car on the track. Even though we've seen they still use that on the broadcast, it's unfortunate we don't have access to that. But the onboard ones, obviously, it's even better in some cases because you can see through the windshield of what the crew is doing if they're in the garage area, or you can see if they're being towed, and you can hear what the driver's saying. The problem with NASCAR Drive, though, last year, at least in my experience, about the last third of the season, I couldn't get it to work because there were so many ads that kept popping up all the time. And it just made it completely impractical. I'd be hearing in my ear, there'd be some commercial playing, and then I refresh it or change the channel to somebody else, and it starts the ad over. And I pretty much, probably the last like 5 races of last year, I don't remember how many screenshots I did, but it seemed like I hardly used it at all. I pretty much just closed it for most of it. And it's like, look, I'm just going to piece this together as best I can with the audio and so forth there. So I'm glad that they had, some improvement to it there. It's unfortunate, again, it having a paywall for it is unfortunate in terms of having people have access to it, because I think it really does enhance the experience. So many people watch second screen content with these races anymore, certainly to do anything on social media. But again, if long term, if they ever worked out a deal where it's like just for that deal and you didn't have to get the whole thing, because I don't really care about any of the content on there, HBO content and stuff like that on there. I haven't really watched those channels in years, really, especially with YouTube being what it is now. If they separated that out or something, and maybe something that's a little bit more affordable, I think that would be great. At least something on par with like the scanner audio there that NASCAR provides. So we'll see. I think Daytona and these next couple of races here in a couple of weeks, they're going to be a good indication of how that goes. I think it'll be kind of interesting to see. Again, most of my notes on the race here itself, again, it reminds me so much of like when they repaved Bristol and they're like, oh, it's got gradient banking, it's gonna be even crazier than it used to be. Or they got Wilkesboro and they're like, oh, everybody's gonna be running over each other because they're gonna want to win the first Wilkesboro race. Everybody, it always sounds like on paper that's going to happen. But these are really skilled drivers. They can adjust to these things really well. I saw it at the Clash in that first year. They'd be driving out there, they'd kind of tiptoe around the track for maybe about 5 or 6 laps, and you'd see it on the lap time progression. Like different drivers get up there, sometimes a couple of them would get a little bit more bold, and then others would catch up to them, and then pretty soon, in about 15, 20 laps, they got it figured out, and they're already up to speed. They can adjust to a lot of these situations. And I think it's the exciting thing that we're seeing about this era of the sport. Is that, they can go over to these different tracks or tracks they haven't been to in decades and put together a pretty good show. Doesn't mean that there's not still work that needs to be done. I do think that, it's somebody pointed this out. I forgot who tweeted this, but it was a very good point. To say that with this car, isn't it crazy that like the best short track is Bowman Gray, that the best road course is the Chicago street course, and like it's really good at 1.5-mile tracks, and the best super speedway is Atlanta. I would kind of argue with that, honestly, but it's not far from the truth that it seems like this car is good at very unusual tracks there in general, and it seems to stumble at the more traditional tracks, in spite of what we saw here tonight. So I think that's a different kind of look there too. But yeah, again, I was pretty entertained. I really enjoyed this. I felt like I love the atmosphere of the track. I think that came across in the broadcast pretty well. I felt like I was able to kind of ignore a lot of the artifice that, I'm just not into. I don't really, the pre-races always run a bit long, and they don't seem to, show as much, but and then, yeah, I mean, anything I miss in the broadcast, I feel like the second screen kind of picked that up pretty well. I think just watching it by itself, I'm not sure if I would have got the full appreciation of what was happening further back in the pack there, especially with, it seems like pretty much most of the cautions kind of were triggered in and around where Kyle Busch was running in this race, and that just made it an exhausting night for him in this one. I imagine that at the end of this one, he's looking to get a fresh start at Daytona and potentially get his first 500 win in his 20th attempt this year, correct? So he's meeting the Earnhardt number on that, but we'll find out what the case is there. But again, it's yeah. I mean, again, for an exhibition race, for something like this, I know. I guess the other discussion is like, should this continue to be a event that moves from track to track and it's always new every year, or should it just stay in some place for a while? There were discussions, at least rumors, people talking about maybe making it an international event, or that it could, I mean, they were talking about this back during the LA Clash era. They're like, okay, can we do this internationally? Can we, bring this to other countries and other venues and literally just set up a track somewhere or use an existing course? I don't know if that would be necessary. Honestly, I think that I'd like to see international exhibition races, kind of like the Japan race or something, maybe where you bolt it on at the end of the year and it's something separate from that, or maybe, something of that nature. I don't know if that's a top priority right now. We'll see what the response is going to be from the Mexico City race. We're going to certainly see this year with that being a points-paying race. That's going to definitely be something to wait for. And I think that Canada is something they should still revisit, because Montreal is a beautiful track. Most Sport's a beautiful track. And those are the only ones that we've really explored recently. There's other places that the circuit up there runs as well, even some short tracks and so forth, that could probably be looked at as well. If they're thinking internationally, maybe they're thinking that locally and maybe trying something there, and maybe beyond that, kind of work out. I think something maybe in long term, if there's a crossover with like the Whelen Euro series, and maybe they go over there, kind of like we've seen Ryan Vargas and Jennifer Jo Cobb compete in those circuits over there. Maybe do a companion event with that, bring your big name guys out there, and then you got the Whelen Euro guys, and do something like this where you kind of bring some of them in there to run maybe for some smaller or lower funded cup teams, and have them, have at it and see what happens. Maybe that's something in the future. I don't know how practical that would be. Obviously, with the time difference, it's going to be kind of a different experience. But all this for the Clash, I'm not so sure. Because I think with this event here, if they fine tune the car and make it less aero dependent, and allow it to give it some more horsepower, so you're burning off the tires on this thing, I think it would put on a really good show, because there were hints of it here. Justin Haley being just a wrecking ball during so much of yesterday's heat races there. Seeing Josh Berry, he of the late model history in there, kind of tapping back into his roots, and perfectly. Wonderful that he was able to get the Wood brothers into the main event with the backseater scheme there on the number 21. Great to see that. And kicking off the diamond anniversary for the Wood brothers this year. That was a great story in and of itself. Would have been great to see Eric Jones get in there too. He was really good in there, trying to get the Petty number. Obviously, Legacy Motor Club is separate from what Petty Enterprises was, but still, again, it's in the name, Legacy. Still trying to get that program out there. I think this was I would love if this weekend turned out to be a massive turnaround for it. It may be too much of an outlier to determine anything, because this track is so small and unusual, and it being an exhibition race. But I was very pleased with how well Eric Jones showed, despite the damage he got very early in this race, that he was still aggressively fighting in there. He of being such a good driver at legacy tracks like at Darlington, being a two-time Southern 500 winner. That was great to see. And John Hunter Nemechek, who I've always been very high on the show. Again, I would love to see things turn around for him after being the lowest ranked of the drivers that completed all the races last season. Him getting in some fisticuffs there with on-track fisticuffs, rather, just bumping and banging with Ryan Preece, ended up on the short end of that stick. Team managed to fix that car back up, and in this race tonight, didn't transfer into the main event, but got fourth in the last chance qualifier. That was still a fine job, given that was basically almost the exact same size as the main event with 19 cars, thanks to all these open teams that were attempting the race, and good for them too. I'm so encouraged by how many open teams showed up for this. Obviously, the fact that it's in the Charlotte area and it's just a couple exits down the freeway, that makes it so much easier. It's very different from how it is out here and running in LA. And we just had the chartered guys out here for all of those events. But I'm hopeful, and especially from what we've heard for Daytona in a couple weeks too, that we are going to get a lot of open teams. And maybe with the possibility of that, maybe the reason that 41st spot that driver, that's contributed a lot and getting a, bonus spot in the field, that may end up getting used not just once for Daytona, but maybe in future races. Excuse me. So, the way that that's set up here, I think, is going to be really, really interesting, and I'm going to be very excited about that for Daytona. And some that we're not so excited about it. I guess we can talk about this. This kind of dovetails into Denny Hamlin's quote earlier about not being a particular fan of drivers, earning their spot into the field there. That he wants basically, taking him at his word in his quote there, that he wanted drivers that if you're trying to compete against Cup Series guys, you got to at least be able to qualify your car. That you shouldn't be just given a spot in the field. I understand where he's coming from there. It's a little bit tone deaf, though, to me, with the charter system being what it is, because he doesn't have to worry about that. His team doesn't have to worry about that. He'll probably, and then his response will be, well, we earned it. It's like, okay, we earned it from, well, it's like, well, that's arbitrary too. It's just as arbitrary as when the charter system was created. They just said, oh, these teams, they've earned it. They've earned a guaranteed spot because they've run the maximum number of races for X number of years. But where'd that rule come from? Well, they just made it up, and they said, oh, I've been a good person today. I've deserved this. It's like that doesn't mean anything. They just kind of went with that, and ultimately that rule, it must be said, left out the Wood brothers, who were the oldest team in the entire history of the sport. The only reason they didn't get in, they were a part-time team for a couple of years. So why they didn't feel like extending that and they had to take the long route to get back into the sport here as a chartered entry, I don't know. I think that would be worth another discussion. But yeah, I found it rich that Denny was bringing this up here at the same time, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it in his podcast going forward there. But again, I think that, again, the charter system, and again, even if it's not getting rid of the charter system entirely necessarily, like, which was my response, and I do stand by it. If that's too big of an ask, if that's going to be too much of a problem, then okay, all right, well, how about you get the charter benefits, but you're not locked into every race all year? How about you just get rid of that? And, and it's like, okay, well, you're a top team. You should be able to qualify for all the races, but it's not necessarily a given. Maybe there's going to be, like Daytona, we're going to have more than 40 cars even attempting the race. Or we're going to have some other races where, it's going to be maybe 41 cars and you still have to beat that one guy. I'm a big advocate in competition. I think that allowing competition and allowing things, allowing drivers to compete and teams to be able to compete against each other is what's going to make everybody better. And they think, oh, well, it's going to have just a bunch of slow guys are going to qualify for the field. It's like, no, the best of the slow teams are the ones that are going to be qualifying for the field. If the slow teams really want to get in, they need to step it up too. It's a tide that's supposed to raise all boats. And the other thing too is that you're not always going to have enough teams for the chartered spots. That's Formula One's dealing with this too, because they have some teams in there that are on the lower end, and they're still like thumping their chest about, oh, isn't this great that we're on the cool guys club and here's that. But even everybody knows that there's a world of difference between a Ferrari and a Mercedes team and then a Williams or a Haas team. They're not the same. And, there's Formula One fans I've talked to where they don't even remember some of the other smaller teams out there, even in a field where it's only, 20 or 22 cars. So what's the point of that? And in NASCAR, it's always been much more about that competition and allowing that and allowing, the flexibility that happens over time. Because again, as I said a moment ago, you're not always going to have enough strong teams to fill those chartered spots. Some of them may not be that competitive. And they may just end up with a charter or just a situation there because that's the way the sport is. It's always increased the number of teams when the economy is really, really good and when sponsors are easier to get and the sport's really popular. And then it's been a struggle in leaner times where you don't really have enough cars and maybe you have starting parks or underfunded guys filling the field. That's going to happen no matter what. And we've still seen it during this chartered era. We've seen an increasing number of races these last few seasons, especially with this new car, where you only have 36 guys showing up, or you don't have a full 40 car field out there, even a full 40, not even sending anybody home where you have 40 plus cars. So that's really going to be the situation. I know I've been a broken record on that, and I'm going down the same road on this too. But again, it's the same deal there. Some dude 77. A very good point there too. I take Denny's comment as why do some open cars get preference versus others? If you think about it, it does feel like NASCAR giving preferential treatment to programs with a bigger budget. That's very true. It's a very good point there at the same time. I get the frustration of like having somebody just handed something that everybody else is trying to earn. I just think that, again, it doesn't seem like they're doing it to themselves. They've already done it to themselves through the charter system. They've already given themselves an asset. A charter is only worth something because they say it is, and because the sanctioning body has allowed it to exist. Doing it with the same with open teams. It does reek of that. I think that I'm glad, again, as I mentioned when this rule first came out, I'm glad it wasn't at the cost of someone who did earn their spot. At least it's not that. And okay, they don't get what? They don't get a share of the purse, they don't get points or whatever, but they get to be in the race. Nobody's getting kicked out from it. If that were the case, I would have a serious problem with it for sure. Again, if these open teams really want to get creative about it, they could. I would like to think that they were all afforded this opportunity to request it. Now, maybe that request is denied because NASCAR's got to approve it and say, okay, your guy that you're hiring to drive this is in this abstract category, and if they don't qualify for the race, we're still going to just say, he's in the race anyway. It is a slippery slope. I hear you on that for sure, and it's a very good point. But again, there's other things that teams can do. You're just gonna have to work just that much harder, And if it's going to be this kind of other thing there, where it's going to be something preferential to other guy, maybe it's something that's not going to be available to the other open teams out there. But those spots that they're competing for are still eligible for them. I'm glad that as long as it doesn't close an avenue for people to compete in there, that's fine. And I think even Castroneves, for example, who clearly was the intent behind this rule, does he want to be the 41st guy? Does he want to just be handed the spot? No, I don't think so. I'm sure he would love to be in the race regardless. But again, you may even have situations where drivers are offered this and don't want it. Because again, maybe they want the money or the points or whatever. That could be a situation too. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. I think it'll be, I still think it's such a rare situation that I don't think it's going to be coming up that often because we've had such short fields all the time. What concerned me with this, and I don't think it was, maybe the lawsuit has something to do with it. I certainly understand Denny Hamlin's perspective in that aspect, but I think to me, it sounds like they're expecting certainly a lot of entries for the Daytona 500, and I'm hopeful that they also think that they're getting a lot of entries for other races later this year, that we are going to have a resurgence in open teams. I don't know what to account for that, because it still seems like they're not getting paid hardly anything. But if there is a resurgence in them through the rest of this year, yeah, maybe something like that happens. I mean, we had the past champions provisional, and that was pretty much the Richard Petty provisional for a while, and then it was the Darrell Waltrip provisional for a while, and they kind of took that on themselves. Even tonight with the Ryan Blaney one there, he pretty much, I thought he had kind of an interesting strategy in this race. It's actually good to kind of lead into this. Blaney this weekend had a problem. He had a mechanical problem, had something go through the oil cooler late in yesterday's heat race, dropped into the back of the field. He was trailing smoke everywhere, and Fox was doing everything they could to not show where the smoke was coming from. We just kind of heard that this was happening. But then that happened. He ends up in last place, so he's got to go through the last chance qualifier. They got to replace the oil pump. They got to replace all that. Send him back out there for the last chance qualifier. He's going to start at the back of the field for that. He doesn't have to start last chance qualifier because Joey Logano, his teammate who won the championship last year, got second in his heat race, so he's already going to advance into the main event. Blaney, meanwhile, is now the next driver eligible for this champion's spot in the field. So he's going to be able to start in that. If he doesn't choose to start the heat race at all, he doesn't have to do it at all. He'll just rely on that, and he'll start 23rd and last in the main event anyway. And he conceivably could have done that, but the team, of course, made this change. They want to make sure it's working. There's not going to be any practice between now and then the race, so they kind of treated this as practice. And if you notice, and I'm sure the broadcast didn't show it that much, he was at the back of the field and trailing by open track for almost the entirety of the time he was out there during that last chance qualifier. He didn't really try to get past anybody. He was just kind of lagging back and just kind of letting the track, let the field get away from him there and just feeling things out. And then about 25, 30 laps into the race, he pulls off the track and parks the car. And then it's like, okay, we're going to just get ready for the race. And I think that may have really had a factor in his climb through the field in the main event. I really do. I think that he started the tail end of this field again, had a tail end of the field from the provisional, and I think that allowed him to kind of have a long but eventual rise through the field. I don't know if how the tire strategy was working out. We got a little taste of that, kind of from Larry McReynolds was bringing up at one point about teams using tires from the final practice session that was used for qualifying, since that was just a few laps. I think that maybe something worked out there that he could work out his strategy. I thought it was a brilliant drive. And I forgot that he actually started last in the LA Clash last year and also got in the top 5. So maybe they've really figured out how to handle this on a 200 or 150 lap race or something like that too. That'll be a different way to look at that at the same time. Again, it's kind of an interesting situation. Let's see here. But again, it's I just thought it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting for Denny Hamlin to kind of take that viewpoint, given that everything's about this charter system and fighting so hard to get this charter status, and just forgetting that that's kind of at the core of what it is guaranteeing your starting spot so you're more marketable for sponsors, and conceivably you have an asset that you can sell that's going to be worth something, that's going to be worth more than the property, the cars, etc., even though they're spec cars built by NASCAR, and now that should be kind of a moot point at this point, but that's where we are. I don't know. Regardless, looking through the rest of the field here. Touched on Chase Briscoe falling out of the race again. Good job by the onboard camera, kind of featuring what was happening there. Suarez ends up next to last there. He was 2 laps down. Briscoe is the only driver to fall out of the race. I saw in the chat there, did we already get a call? We already got a call on tech inspection? I haven't even looked at my social media here. Let me refresh that. Alrighty. Alan Cavana just tweeting here, good racing, awesome atmosphere, packed house, saw 2 fan favorites get the checkered flag. A lot of people going home happy. Excellent. Well, hey, there you go. That's one thing to definitely talk about. Let's see. Oh, yes, I was looking for tech inspection. Are we already good? I guess there wasn't that much to inspect, but we'll see. Yes, okay, there we go. 9 minutes ago. Tech complete, no issues. Elliott is the winner of the clash. And showing the unofficial results again, steering issues, the reason for Briscoe's exit. Unfortunate end there to his first start in Martin Truex's car there. Although, again, I think he's still going to be off to a decent start. He had a good starting spot, starting in the top 10, and we'll find out how things are going to look in Daytona, where he gets to race against Truex, conceivably, so long as Truex actually qualifies his open car into the race, the Tricon Garage deal, in a couple weeks, rather. We'll find out if that's going to be the story there, too. Let's see here. Yeah, we talked about the local drivers. That was really exciting. Good to see them get some press. Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, I mean, again, people want to expect that there's going to be a battle, a big crash fest up front. I mean, if you had a battle for the lead that was as good as some of the battles in the middle of the pack, you probably have people feeling much more positive about this. I can certainly see that. But again, I think there was a lot that was going on through the field that was interesting there too. In fact, actually, kind of another interesting thing happening in the garage area during this was Riley Herbst during the last chance qualifier. Apparently, he had a steering issue as well. I don't know if something just shut down, like maybe a pump, like a belt came off or something. But all of a sudden, he couldn't steer that car around the track and actually had to fight that thing back into the garage area and spent about at least 2 stays in the garage area. And was about 15 laps down. Unfortunately, again, the max cameras weren't working at that point. At least I didn't see them working. But you could tell from the audio that they were having him wait by the yellow barrels to get back out there. And good on him for actually trying to finish the race there. He ended up getting actually about 5 of his laps back because of the number of cautions at the end. He wasn't going to be a factor for actually winning the race there. But for his first laps in a 2311 car, for the new third entry there, the 35 car, that was definitely still something to see there at the same time. I don't know if there was actually a confrontation between Burt Myers and Ricky Stenhouse. Certainly the crowd was kind of egging on for something like that, which would be very much consistent with kind of the history of the Madhouse itself. But that would be another one to look at too. Just kind of glancing at my notes here from some of the other events there too. We had the tangle between Cole Custer and AJ Allmendinger in the heat race there. That was interesting there. That little bump that comes out from the wall, I'm glad they preserved that with the barriers. They weren't real sticklers about trying to alter the profile of the track. I really applaud them for doing that, because NASCAR didn't have to do that. They could have straightened that out and just said, hey, forget you, we're going to have the barriers be where they're going to be, and that's it. That was good to see. That's more than just paying lip service to the history of a track. It's much like a baseball field, like I saw a graphic recently about overlaying all the different baseball fields everywhere and how the outfield is just radically different from one stadium to the next. It's nice to kind of preserve that. Even in racing, you wouldn't really think about it applying here, but it certainly does. Let's see here. Good to see Carl Long's team back out there. Garrett Smithley got spun around in his heat race there, or I believe in the last chance qualifier there as well, but still was able to get the car back in one piece there. We'll see what happens with Carl and their program going forward. Alrighty. Looking at other notes here at the same time. Yeah, Austin Dillon, my goodness, he was kind of going through everything. He was actually my pick to win it all for this race. I figured, especially when Steve Toronto was posting that picture of Dillon's history and how he's been really good in the last few Clash races, especially the one in LA there, and one of them being following his teammate Kyle Busch right through the field there. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case here, too. He ended up the top qualified car that missed the show. Cody Ware had some points where he was looking good. I know Kyle Larson was struggling in his heat race, and Cody was kind of battling him there too. Kind of reminded me of how Cody was running, really in the first Clash race, and almost was able to get a starting spot in the main event there too. I thought he did a fine job, at least in his heat race there that first year. But no shortage of stuff that was going on. Certainly now that we have the official call here, we'll get the Chase Briscoe will be the feature of the article tonight. We'll have that up for you later tonight at lastcar.info. And that'll be the first one for this season here as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the entry list storylines article as well. There was no shortage of stuff to go over. Certainly a big portion of the field completely restructured simply by the shutting down of Stewart-Haas Racing last year. It was really hard to kind of get your hands around that until kind of seeing a race like this tonight where you just see where everybody kind of scattered off to. Yeah, really, again, kind of an interesting change there for who kind of ended up where. Let's see here. Where did Priest ultimately get in the main event? He was 11th. Okay, I thought he was running better than that. It shows him in the last car on the lead lap, the 11th spot. I saw after his heat race and how well he run in practice, I expected him to be a bigger factor, kind of like he was in the LA Clash. I guess it was 2 years ago, where he had that really good run. Then he had Electrical Gremlin there, and then Truex ended up beating him. He had a fine run in that, but didn't happen. And then we saw Ty Gibbs, who had been so dominant in the LA Clash last year before Denny Hamlin beat him. Really wasn't a factor in this one. Gotten several altercations there, and was short of a starting spot in the main event there too. Carson Hocevar was pleased with his performance, starting things off. Unfortunately, he did get in an incident in this race here. He got scooped into the outside wall, but distinguished himself very much in the heat races and made the show. Mentioning Priest earlier, this was mentioned by many on social media, that RFK Racing didn't really qualify for any of the clashes back in LA, but got all three of their cars into this one, even with the expansion with Priest. Turned out to be a great move there too. Of the three, Buescher seemed to have kind of the best run. I know Keselowski got an incident there, and then Priest back in the 11th spot there, right behind Buescher, the 10th spot. Good job by Shane Van Gisbergen, running in the 9th spot there as well. Fine effort there for the Trackhouse effort. I actually kind of like the two paint schemes the Trackhouse had here. I know they had mixed reviews, and I know I wasn't really happy about putting sponsors on the A-pillar there, but I gotta say, these two look pretty cool. And even though what was strange to me about those two is they kind of reminded me more of a 2311 paint scheme. They almost look like a sneaker pattern on there. Especially Chastain's. Chastain's car looked really nice out there. In terms of some of the paint schemes, I really liked his. I don't know how much more common that's going to be. Maybe that was just something special just for this race before you get WeatherTech and some of the other team partners out there backing him this year. But I thought they were pretty slick paint schemes. I mean, yeah, those are, if they make those in diecast, I would jump on that for sure. Kind of like I don't have something for our show and tell. We had our last show and tell there. I ordered a couple diecasts in a box that just got utterly demolished in transit here, and we were unpacking that on there. So if you haven't seen that on our last stream here, last one before the season starts, I encourage you to check that out because that was a lot of fun. But let's see here. Yeah, really, I mean that's pretty much all I have to say really about the main event itself. I think that I think it was pretty solid. I mean, I think I feel optimistic going into this year, and it's an interesting field. I think there's going to be some interesting drivers and teams, and however they qualify into these races. Certainly having a big field of open teams and trying to figure out where they're going to rank themselves. And the possibility of teams like Team Amerivet, which apparently is not entered in Daytona next in 2 weeks, but is looking at other races later this year. That would be great to see. So we'll see how things shake out there. But we're gonna have no shortage of stuff to talk about on the show here for sure. Let's see here. So we already have the call on this. I can. Oh yes. Let me see here. Beast of Metal. Oh goodness. Let me get your super chat here as well. Thank you so much on that. Beast of Metal again. Thank you for the super chat here. $9.12. Thank you. I appreciate it. And very reminiscent, of course, the Battle of the Finish. And I see that's what you're referring to here. Am I the only one who thought Fox could have done a better job showing off Blaney's march through the field? Seemed like a better short track package, though. Again, agree on both points. Again, I think that this put on certainly a better race than we saw at Bristol last year or some of those other ones. Decent tire compound, like seeing that there was some rubber even getting like flattened out on the track. Like it looked like there was construction paper on the track there at some point. There was so much rubber getting laid down. That was really cool to see. But yeah, Blaney's march to the field, I was completely caught off guard by where Blaney was until the very end of the race when he was suddenly up there and taking the second spot. I was like, where on earth did he come from? That's the kind of thing that really does. That's where you have to have like really good pit reporters, and you have to have everybody in the booth looking at different things. They can't all just look at the same thing and then just, repeat the same thing that everybody else is saying. There needs to be some variety there because maybe they'll catch on to something that, you put three people in a room to do anything, and they're gonna have different perceptions of what they're seeing. It's when they start repeating each other that you just kind of have a situation that doesn't work out quite as well. But yeah, I agree. I think they could have covered it much better because it did surprise me. I know what I do is I look at the back of the field, and even after Briscoe fell out, I was kind of looking back there too. But regardless, I think that that could have been better, definitely for sure. Let's see here. I like combining numbers that feel meaningful into these sometimes. Want to give Blaney a hat tip for that March, but I am a Chase fan first and foremost. Oh, I see that, Beast Metal. Yeah, I definitely understand enjoying that too at the same time. So, again, congratulations for your guy. And now that we heard the official call and the inspection, now he secured that win there in post-race inspection too. So, yeah, again, a decent start. The Clash, as it's always been, even now that it's now being on a bull ring instead of Daytona, it's just supposed to be the appetizer. You're not supposed to fill up on this one. So if it leaves something to be desired, if it wasn't everything you hoped it should be, that's totally fine. That's okay. But if it was at least entertaining in the moment, I think it's accomplished what it was supposed to do. If you really look at some of the last races that were run at Bowman Gray Stadium as points races, they were 250 lap races, so not even that much longer than this. I didn't mention this earlier. I kind of was getting close to it, but didn't. Really enjoyed seeing, I think it was the Bill Whitley car, the Corvette that was entered in there. That was really exciting. I think that was really cool to see out there that they did this restoration effort. And I don't know if it was restored after, in 1963, Whitley actually crashed that car on the second lap of the race and finished last. The only time a Corvette has actually finished last in a Cup Series race, because back then, they were much more specific in listing the manufacturers of cars out there. They'd say like a Chevy, or they'd say like a 63 Chevy, or like different years or something. And for those races in particular, they distinguished even a Corvette, even though it's obviously a Chevrolet, they distinguished that as just a completely different model from the other Chevrolets that were in the race. But if you look at Whitley's statistics after that race, he's not shown in a Corvette anymore. He's shown listed in a Chevrolet. I don't know for sure if the cars he ran later in his career were just regular Chevrolets as anybody else's, or if he was running a Corvette still and NASCAR just classified it differently. Because obviously, for example, there's other races you could look back at and they would show a Camaro listed back then. And of course, that's the model they're running now, although they took the Camaro branding off of the Chevrolets here. But there were races where if they ran different models, they would say, okay, here's a Camaro, here's a current year's Chevrolet, and then here's a Corvette or something. So that was interesting. And they would run kind of the international races. But they restored this car, and just beautiful job they did on it there. Running the 17X, which was the number that it ran when Whitley, I keep thinking I want to say Bill Shirey, but Will Whitley got involved in that accident there back then. I don't know if it was recovered just from that incident or if he ran it in other races or other non-sanctioned races. I got to look into the rest of that story there and just kind of see the pictures on social media. But kudos to them for doing that. Such a quirky little thing in the sports history. You always hear about the time that a Volkswagen Bug was entered in a Cup race many years ago. And again, it's just wonderful, those little quirks and idiosyncrasies in the sport there. So hopefully that's something that gets even more attention coming up there too. So kudos to everybody that was involved in that project. Yeah, no, I mean, and Alex, I see your comment there as well. Yeah, that, again, it would be great to see the Clash back at Daytona. Who knows? I mean, it is always exciting where I think the other thing that made the Clash great at Daytona is that you had practice all week, that you would have Daytona 500 practice, sometimes qualifying right before or right after the shootout, and then you'd have practice through the week. I remember they always had like Wednesday practice, and they always seemed like something crazy would happen during that. Luckily, we're seeing a little more practice this year, so that the first time they hit the track isn't qualifying. That was a massive mistake they made last year, and I'm glad they're starting to correct that. They still need to lean into it a lot more and understand that this is the signature race. They should have more practice than anywhere else, and maybe that helps the other venues get more practice back too. We'll see, but that should be exciting too. So we'll see. Let's see here. Oh, Vody just recently posted the 2009 All-Star race. Very exciting. Desert Fox. Oh, thank you for bringing up that as well. Shoot, I didn't do this earlier, but I'll do it. I'll go and do it on the show here because I got to update it in the Patreon here after the show here tonight. So our next stream, for those of you tuning in, I know it's already pretty late for those of you on the East Coast here. But our next stream is going to be next Saturday. I'm planning the day before the Super Bowl. I'm going to do another race watch along, and we had a poll in the Patreon. And where was the poll? I got to find that here. Alrighty, and let's see. Voting is closed, and the winner with 35% of the vote. We had several candidates. We had about a half dozen different races. They wanted to see the 1997 Winston 500 at Talladega, which I believe is the one that Mark Martin won without any cautions in it. So that will be our next race watch along. That'll be next Saturday, and we'll be doing that. And then our next show after that will be for the Daytona 500, the night of that event there too. So it's going to be a very exciting stretch there too. Do Winston 500 it is. Just posting in the Patreon here for those of you in there. Big thanks. We actually had a new member from Germany join the Patreon here this week. So big thanks to him and to everyone else. If you're interested in that, patreon.com/lastcaronbrock. I did have the announcement just earlier this week. Those of you who received the newsletter from the site, I originally was planning on doing the race from races at Talladega and Texas this spring. However, I have since changed those plans, so I do apologize. We're not going to be doing Texas this year. If you're planning on attending that race or meeting up there, unfortunately, I'm not going to be there for that one. But I have a very good reason for it. My plan is to do the Rockingham Truck Series and Xfinity Series weekend. And as a special bonus on that, folks on my Patreon actually voted for me to do a starting grid video for the Xfinity race in Rockingham. And I actually have an idea for that doing the coverage of the track should make that a little bit easier, hopefully. So I do plan on working on that during that weekend as well. So the reason for that test session that came up earlier this week where they had the truck and Xfinity teams out there, just exhilarating. I mean, the new surface out there, it looks like that should be a hell of a show. And I would love to, I was already planning on doing a trip to North Carolina at some point because I have some business out there. There's a couple of things I want to kind of handle, and I'd love to bring everybody in on that once we're out there. But also just support that event in general. Hopefully it gets a cup date back. It gets back on the schedule. I would have loved to do this for North Wilkesboro a couple years ago. Just couldn't make it work. But now with this other opportunity with this one, I think it's too good to pass up. So the plan is in April, that will be the start of my trackside coverage this year. We're going to start at Rockingham in April 18th and 19th. And then we're going to go to Talladega the following week. And it'll be the first time that I've covered races at both of these tracks. Never been to any of them at all. I didn't go to either of these as a younger fan. Obviously grew up watching races on both of them. And I hope that you guys will enjoy that at the same time. So that's going to be a big thing coming up there too. So I hope you're excited for that. I haven't ruled out those of you in the Texas area that were counting on that race there. Don't worry. That's another venue. I really enjoyed going there in 2021. We may be back out there in the future as well. But this year, that's kind of what we're looking at. So it's going to be Rockingham, Talladega. Then we go to Sears Point in July, the home track. And then we're going back to Phoenix for the championship weekend from Halloween through first weekend of November there. So that is the plan this season there as well. Again, still subject to change. Things come up. Of course, I'll keep you posted if that's the case there. But that's what we're looking at this year. So hopefully that'll be a big part of that coming up here too. Also, for those of you who like to produce content on this channel here as well, I am pleased to say that I uploaded the latest version of the newest episode for 500 Days. We've been just finishing editing that this past weekend here. Luckily, things worked out that I was able to kind of spend some extra time on that and kind of fine tune it. I'm going to review it first before I put it in the Patreon. I hope to have that up there tomorrow if everything looks good. And then you'll have advanced access to that. And then I'm looking to do a premiere the next week after that. So we have new content coming up here. And then I have a very big video that I need to get the script recorded and get that set up there. And we'll get going. And I have another script from NASCAR Man History that just came in last week. and I hope to get that done here as well and get that checked out. So a lot of big, exciting things coming up here on top of the fact that we got the Daytona 500 coming up. And there's some football game coming up here in the meantime, but what happened last week has already happened, and so I don't really particularly care about that. But am I boycotting it? No, realistically, but yeah, it's going to be just another. I'm gonna. I'll tell you this. I'll be watching the Super Bowl about the same way that I watch the Oscars, which is just like I'm just counting on it just being comedy. Like just it's like this is gonna be the most ridiculous thing that they're gonna put on at that point too. So yeah, that's gonna be what we're kind of looking at here coming up here at the same time. Case on Channel 5 asking about doing another terrible broadcast. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't really looked at that series too much here at the meantime, but that'll be the case there too. But we will do, not a terrible broadcast, but we will do a reaction, kind of like a watch along there for the 97 Winston 500 that next week there. Oh, Desert Fox, you pull for the same team Last Bro does too. Yeah, I hate it for you guys. I know that LA game was not much fun. Alrighty. Let's see. So I'm going to we'll do some trivia here at the end. I know it's kind of again late there. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Didn't expect to get about 70 people here for tonight's stream, but I appreciate you all tuning in there. Again, congratulations to Chase Elliott and Chase Briscoe will be your feature for the Last Car article later tonight. We'll go ahead and I'm bringing out the late 90s deal here, and we'll do, hang on. Okay. And so again, NASCAR pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Go ahead and let me know in the chat which category you'd like, and we'll do that. Let's see, did I have anything else for, let's see if I had anything else for show and tell or something. I don't think so for today, but we'll have something, we'll try to get something set up here down the line. I'll kind of check over here on the chat in the meantime. No worries. It's a late night show here too. Hopefully the 500 ends at a reasonable hour. I know we've always had so many issues with rain the last few years, but hopefully we get a good race, a safe race, and an earlier show there that evening. And we'll definitely be talking about the action for that. And then during our watch along next Saturday, I think that'll be fun there too. But yeah, I think I really enjoyed it. I think the adrenaline of starting the year off, and the off season always seems to get shorter and shorter every year. This year's I thought went by really quick because I was just so busy during so much of it. But good work though. I think I got some good scripts that I got a good start on, and I think it's going to make things easier. I have a couple of scripts that are they're so close to being done. I just can't quite get the interviews I need to kind of finish them up. So I'm learning to just kind of just park those and like don't worry about it. If I hear back from the guy, I'll hear back from him. If I don't, I don't. We'll just kind of work with it. But these other ones, I got some other ones here that I think are going to be really good. So excited about that. I want to make a trailer for this next one here, and I think that'll be a fun way to reveal it. But we'll get that going here soon enough. Oh, I really enjoyed the Tubi channel, by the way. I finally checked that out this week. The watch along with the commercial breaks and stuff, and then showing all the old Clash races. Great stuff. Long overdue. Really branching out into the streaming thing. I didn't watch the modified race on there. I really should have. But I see that they're going to do some other events like that on there, which is fantastic. I think that's going to be really enjoyable. Especially if they're having other like support events. I don't know if they're going to do something like that for like the West Series race at Sears Point. That's usually a really enjoyable event. I know the Flow Racing does a great job with their coverage, but I don't know if it gets simulcast on this 2B deal. That seems to be what they did with the modified thing. Hopefully we get something like that. I think that would be fantastic. Yeah, provisionals only for drivers from others. Okay, that makes sense. Some dude 77. Yeah, so it wouldn't be able to work for current regular drivers. So there's that. Again, it's you want to bring attention into the sport with drivers that are in other spots, but they should be capable of actually qualifying a car into the race, but, we'll see. Let's see. I'm glad I didn't go too cold. It did look pretty cold out there for sure. That's one thing. The clash was not even a problem. I mean, we didn't do it during the year it was at night, but a nighttime at this time of year in LA is still gonna be like 65 degrees, so it's not gonna be too bad. So that'll be that. Yes, rest in peace, Bill Weber. Tyler, thank you for bringing that up there too. Oh, so sad, so sad. And I'm glad so many people are sharing videos about his career. I really feel like he didn't really get. Um, I don't know what it was. I mean, I know that he came in during the time replacing Alan Bestwick, and there was that, and you got people that prefer one or the other. The only thing that always kind of grated me about Bill Weber was when he did the cautions out, the race is over, but that wasn't his fault. That was the sanctioning body and the caution rules, and I think all that needs to get revisited. I think the Bill Weber I remember from the broadcast was he was always very informative. He did his homework. I'll tell you this: every time Bill Weber was out there, he would have all these statistics that he would bring up, and he would and he would connect them, which I think is really big. He's not just popping off a bunch of things that are like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. He'd try to connect it, and he'd say like, oh, it's like, and he would try to tie it into the race that you're about to see, or what's happening in that moment. And that's where he was good. He's another person that was really good as a host. And that's where I say, when I talk about Adam Alexander being a good host, or Chris Myers or something like that, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I think that's a really important role. It's like a Ken Squire kind of thing. Some are able to jump into the play-by-play thing pretty good. Not all of them. Again, I think Bill Weber, there's probably people that have mixed, reactions to that. But I think really, again, he's always, trying to kind of cobble these bits of information together and make it interesting, that he really wanted the contextualization. I think where he was at his best was when he was on pit road, and he was doing that. And I'm sure they did multiple takes of it and stuff. You see, if you watch like a wild feed of an old ESPN broadcast, that was the case there. But the way that, that he would bring it up, and he would talk about a driver that he's just standing right next to, and he did it with such intensity, and he had such a real good voice. It was just wonderful. It was wonderful. When he was at his best, he was really, really good. And it's just unfortunate, and I know people have their preferences. I certainly am guilty of that too. But he was such a big part of that ESPN crew back then. And he did a commendable job later in his career when he was branching out into, being back from pit road and being a host or being a broadcaster there. He was excellent at that. And it's sad to hear from the news that we heard. I know there's been people asking questions about, why didn't we hear from December to now? Why did we not hear in about a month? The family has their reasons, whatever is going on there. I'm not going to kind of intrude into that. But it's sad regardless, for sure. So definitely rest in peace to Bill Weber and a tremendous talent there that really kind of, again, it really, really made the sport interesting. And that was, again, that ESPN group, every member of that group. And it's sad that we're losing so many of them. We don't have BP and Bob Jenkins, now Bill Weber. They all had their own little part to play, and they played it so well. And he was a part of that. He was a part of that for sure. While I'm thinking about that, let me look at my notes here too. I see everybody picking their categories here. Let's see. Corey LaJoy kind of looking down on the Busch series. I know there was some controversy over that. I mean, yeah, that was a little strange, especially given Randy's career. His father making a great career in the Busch series, and also with another person we just lost recently, and Bill Baumgartner at the base motorsports effort there that he drove for and won those back-to-back championships in the late 90s. Corey just looks at it differently. I mean, he wants to compete in the Cup Series, and it's unfortunate he has that view of the lower series, because I think he would be very competitive there. But I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what to feel about that thing. But I know people had some pretty strong opinions about that. I guess we'll see what happens with his Cup effort there with the Rick Ware effort, and he's able to bring sponsors together, and that's such a big part of it these days. Regardless of all that, but we'll see what the deal is there too. And then on the flip side there for Rockingham. Another story that's going to be really exciting, Casey Kane coming out of retirement to run an Xfinity race. First time since many years for him to compete there. And certainly a driver that had won the Truck Series race when the series came back out there. a few years ago. Almost won in his second or third Cup start at Rockingham in early 2004. That same race that had all the field fillers in it. That's the reason I want to kind of cover that race too. Kind of go back to the scene where the Carl Long wreck happened and Andy Belmont and the other guys were out there. I think that'd be a wonderful way for that to go full circle. I'd love it if a lot of them attended that race. We'll see. I hope we'll see Carl Long out there at least for their Xfinity program. But we'll see there. And I hope that Jimmy McMurray attempts that race too. I know that's another driver turned broadcaster, and he did a fine job tonight. I think he was solid. But if he came back out there and actually competed, I think that would be cool to see. But yeah. Alrighty. Let's see here. Let's see. We got three for drivers. Okay, we'll do some drivers here. And we'll just do that to wrap up for tonight. Do a bit of a shorter show. I know it's pretty late over there. It's almost 9 o'clock here Pacific, so almost midnight Eastern. So we'll wrap up on a couple trivia questions, and then we'll just jump into that here, folks. So if you'd like to stick around, we'll do that. And if you have any other questions or anything I forgot to cover or didn't cover enough here on this, definitely mention it in the chat, and we'll go into that there as well. No. Let's see. Yeah, drivers. Hang on. Boop, boop, boop. All right. Trying a different arrangement where I have the microphone a little bit lower here, so I keep trying not to hit it. Kept hitting it there before the start of the show here. Okay, here we go. Who told a young Dale Earnhardt, quote, you just might make a driver yet? So potent quotables here. Who told a young Dale Earnhardt, quote, you just might make a driver yet? Tubi is free, Desert Fox. Good question. It's free with commercials, so that's kind of what it is. So I use Roku over here. I assume it's available in other services. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. Who told a young Dale Earnhardt, quote, you just might make a driver yet? That is a question. Did I mention Jeff Striegel? Something happened with Jeff Striegel? I'm not aware of that. He's from the radio, right? Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, not aware offhand there. Jeff Striegel retired? Is that what the story is? I thought that was last season. I guess that would carry over to this year. I don't know if I went into that. Alrighty, here we go. Let's see. Who told a young Dale Earnhardt, quote, you just might make a driver yet? I guess it's for Lee Petty, David Pearson, Bobby Allison, Richard Childress. You know what? Did they mention Bobby Allison much? I didn't hear it in the pre-race here. Well, actually, no, they did. They did. To be fair, they did mention Bobby Allison. They mentioned the 85th win. I think Mike Joy mentioned it like towards the end of the race there, which was good to kind of bring that up there too. Yeah. So I'm glad that was not left out of the proceedings tonight, since that was such a big part of it. I mean, him running at this particular track and running that smaller car. Who told a young Dale Earnhardt, quote, you just might make a driver yet? The answer is Stick Elliott. Stick Elliott is the answer to the question. Stick Elliott. Yeah, it was Rick Allen. It certainly sounded like Rick Allen. Like even misspoke at one point there during it. So I was like, okay, that's got to be Rick Allen. Oh, they mentioned in the post race with talking to Chase. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I didn't really watch too much of the post race, so I was just kind of setting up this. I heard a little bit of Blaney's interview, and that was about it. Yeah, if Jeff Striegel retired, then congratulations to him on his career. I didn't grow up with radio as much. I'm not as strongly opinionated on all that, although I know a lot of people in TV did get their start in radio. Certainly Alan Bestwick, among those, many others there too. But yeah, yeah, Stick Elliott. That was the answer to that one. Let's see. Boop-a-doo. Uh-huh. Alrighty, here we go. Next question here. What Charlotte bus driver later drove to an impressive 46 NASCAR victories? What Charlotte bus driver later drove to an impressive 46 NASCAR victories? Don't look it up. Try to guess it. Try to guess it there. I gotta check out some other stuff here from this. Oh, Bowser Jr., thank you for your super chat as well for $5. Appreciate it. By my count, there are 29 drivers attempting the full Xfinity season. If this holds, it would surpass the current record of 24 back in 2000. Excellent statistic. Wow, that's beating that record by quite a bit. So very big. It does seem like there's been a lot of announcements about full-time efforts here. Certainly getting guys like Harrison Burton back in the Xfinity series for the AM Racing deal. Then you got the new sponsorship and the new bringing back the 71 car number for Ryan Ellis. Congrats to him. I guess Josh Bilicki had an announcement this past week as well. So yeah, I think that was very pleasant. But yes, thank you so much for the super chat there, Bowser Jr. XD. Alrighty. Let me read this again here. What Charlotte bus driver later drove to an impressive 46 NASCAR victories? And the answer is Buck Baker. Buck Baker. Willie B, you got it. There you go. Excellent. Excellent. All right, we're coming to the top of the hour, so I'm just going to do one more question here. We'll wrap it up here for this evening. All righty. Oh, this is a good question. This is a good one to wrap up with my second book. So here we go. What year did Derek Cope start driving full-time for the NASCAR Winston Cup Series? What year did Derek Cope start driving full-time for the NASCAR Winston Cup Series? Got a good start on that. Alrighty, just guess a year here. What year did Derek Cope start driving full time for a NASCAR Winston Cup Series? We got several guesses. I see the 80s starting to populate here. 84, 88, 87, 86, 85. What year did Derek Cope start driving full time for NASCAR Winston Cup? Alrighty. And the answer is 1986. 86 is, whoop, there you go. We'll pull that up there again. 86 is the correct answer. Desert Fox, you got it. Andrew Haywood, you got it first. There you go. Kudos. Willie B, you got it as well. 86 is first time full time. I think that was when he, let's see, that would be the Warren Resor, or I guess he did Fred Stoke for, he did Stoke after Resor. Stoke was, we did the 500. That was 87. 86. Yeah. It might have been more 87 because I know Stoke did the 19 car, but then that they kind of transitioned on that a little bit. Yeah, but it was right in that neck of the woods there for sure. But there you go. All right. Awesome. Well, that will do it for the show tonight. So again, congratulations to Chase Elliott on a tremendous victory here earlier tonight here, or I guess last night on the East Coast here for the Cookout Clash at the Bowman Gray Stadium. Great event. Kudos to NASCAR for putting it on. I'm sure it was a tremendous effort out there. First place that we saw testing for the next-gen car before they came out to LA. So it was cool to kind of see things go full circle there. Yeah, I think whatever they do with that event, I think it's going to be interesting. I hope it kind of stays there. Some stability, I think, would be nice. Yeah, seeing these classic tracks returning to the circuit and breathing new life into it here with this car and um, this ability of for it to race out there is good. And maybe again, hopefully it means something positive coming forward with our short track package. I mean, fields are going to get strung out in short tracks. I'm not willing to hit the panic button yet compared to what we're seeing at Bristol and Martinsville and Richmond and so forth. But hopefully we'll see. I mean, it's not going to be too much longer until we find ourselves there. So, yeah, that will do it for the show here tonight. The website is lastcar.info. The website for my Patreon is patreon.com/lastcaronbrock if you're interested in joining that. And, of course, feel free to check out the other videos on this channel. Our next live stream is going to be next Saturday, which would be February 8th, I want to say. Yes, February 8th. I believe I still need to set a time. I think it's going to be about like 4 or 5 the evening Pacific time. I'll have information on that shortly. And that will be our live watch along of the 1997 Winston 500. We'll pull up the NASCAR Classics version so we get the crystal clear view of it there. Yeah, we'll have some fun with that before we go super speedway racing for Speed Weeks after that. And then our next show after that will be for the Daytona 500. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show here. And I'll see you all next time.